Generally, when we think of horror games, we would think of a game that would be more intended for a mature audience. Games that your mom might call the local priest and get you exercised for playing. Or games that are not wholesome and fun for the whole family, especially to entities like the ESRB. However, there are games out there that fall into the horror, or generally just spooky, scary games genre that are rated T for teen. So what's the deal with these games? Are they actually scary? Well, I'm here to find out. Just a disclaimer before we begin, I'm mainly going to be focusing only on the ESRB ratings of these games, as that's what's used in North America, where I live. Anyways, let's jump right into this. So what's the deal with the teen rating? The ESRB defines the teen rating as games with content that the ESRB believes is suitable for ages 13 and over, including aggressive depictions of violence with minimal blood, moderate suggestive themes, crude humor, and stronger use of profane language. Many horror games on the market tend to receive the M for mature rating, which the ESRB declares as suitable for audiences 17 and older. This is the case since horror games typically contain high amounts of graphic violence or blood and language, so horror games with a rating below M must contain less blood, violence, language, and mature subject matter, right? So how can they be scary? Well, if you ask me, I personally think that a developer can make a game just as scary, if not more scary, by having a well-crafted atmosphere, sound design, and even storyline. So let's take a look at some of these games and see just how scary they really are. I'm going to be rating each of these games on a scale from 1 to 10 on how spooky I think they are. A 1 being about as spooky as an episode of Bluey, and a 10 being soil my pants spooky. Little Nightmares 1 and 2 are games made by Tarsier Studios and released in 2017 and 2021 respectively. I'm going to include both of these games since they're so similar and complement each other quite well. Playing Little Nightmares 1 and 2 together almost feels like it's one game with how seamlessly they fit together. These games are like 3D side-scroller platformer games spliced together with some horror and puzzle elements. These games feature several puzzles, stealth sections, and chases, but little to no combat if you can even consider some of the fighting combat. But little if really any combat. It puts the player in control of a little character called Six in the first game and Mono in the second game. These player characters are incredibly tiny children, trying to navigate their way through a depressing dystopian world called the Nowhere that looks like it would make Tim Burton foam at the mouth. The world is full of many terrifying creatures, including large, decrepit, human-like creatures that will do anything to catch you and eat you. The game is rated T by the ESRB for blood and violence, and that's it. So, is the game scary? I would definitely say yes. Developers of this game struck an immaculate balance with the gameplay, art style, and atmosphere that makes Little Nightmares games actually quite terrifying. The protagonist being so tiny evokes a feeling that you're helpless and must run and hide for your life. The eerie atmosphere also adds an overall uneasiness that continuously haunts you throughout the entire experience. I've never had one moment playing these games where I felt comfortable. You'll always be on edge, even when there are seemingly no enemies around. These games are prime examples of how to make great indie horrors without relying on gore, graphic violence, or jump scares. I would highly recommend you play these games if you haven't already. Hey guys, just an edit here. When I first started writing and editing this video, Little Nightmares 3 was not out yet. But since making this video, Little Nightmares 3 has come out, and I have played through it. It only took me like 2 days, so make of that what you will. I won't spend too much time talking about Little Nightmares 3, but I'll give my quick thoughts about it since it is rated T after all. Little Nightmares 3 was developed by a different studio than the first two games, since Tarsier Studios was acquired by Embracer Group in 2019. But the Little Nightmares IP was still owned by Bandai Namco, who wanted to keep developing the series. So, Little Nightmares 3 was handed to Supermassive Games for development. I think it's worth noting here that Supermassive Games has developed critically acclaimed horror games like Until Dawn, so they do have some good experience with the horror genre, but not to the specific 3D side-scrolling puzzle style that Little Nightmares is known for. A change of developers in a franchise is often a bad sign for me, no matter the case. So, Little Nightmares 3, is it any good? Is it scary? Well, it does remain faithful to the atmospheric style of its predecessors. However, the game overall feels like an imitation of the first Little Nightmares games instead of a continuation of them. It does have an interesting continuation of the lore, but the story itself isn't as intricate or interesting as the first two. Now keep in mind, the first two games already had a storytelling style that left much of the story up to interpretation, so you've always had to piece together the story yourself, or watch people on YouTube talk about it, which is usually what I did. But other than the story, even the gameplay falls quite a bit short of the original two games in my opinion. Even the enemies and set designs don't feel as inspired as the first two games, and feel like they're just desperately trying to imitate what made the first two games so special. Overall, I did enjoy Little Nightmares 3, but it's nowhere near the same level of quality as the first two games. So if you haven't played this one, I would wait till it goes on sale or something before picking it up. I also would say that it's not even as scary as the first two games. It still has eerie elements and creepy set pieces, but I would give Little Nightmares 3 maybe like a 5.6 out of 10 on the spooky meter, whereas I'd give Little Nightmares 1 and 2 like a 6.8 on the spooky scale. Five Nights at Freddy's. I can't not include Five Nights at Freddy's on this list. Since the release of the first game for PC in 2014, Five Nights at Freddy's has absolutely exploded in popularity, allowing it to release 10 more mainline games, as well as many other spin-offs. It has also obtained a movie adaptation with the theatrical release, as well as a crap ton of garbage merch that you can usually find at your local GameStop or Hot Topic. For this game supposedly being a horror game, there sure are a ton of babies obsessed with it. I swear, there are more kids that love Five Nights at Freddy's than there are kids that like Bluey. I've only played the first 3 Five Nights at Freddy's games, which were not originally rated by the ESRB, but were later rated once they were released multi-platform in the core collection. They were rated T, for mild blood and fantasy violence, which is interesting, because what did they mean by fantasy violence as opposed to regular violence? When I think of fantasy violence, I typically think of something more brightly colored, I suppose. Something that could easily contain something like 2 unicorns, or other creatures duking it out, or, you know, something like Pokemon or Zelda. That being said though, at face value, Five Nights at Freddy's is purely a resource manager / survival sim game at its core. At least the first 3 that I've played are. It relies heavily on jump scares, which do get me good sometimes. I wouldn't say jump scares are always bad, they have their place in the horror genre. I mean, look, people have loved jump scares in the horror genre since like forever. Just look at how popular screamers were back on the days of the early internet. That being said, after a while, you do get used to the jump scares in Five Nights at Freddy's, but maybe not quite enough that it'll relieve you of the stress you feel when one is quickly approaching. Where Five Nights at Freddy's excels in its horror is really the Easter eggs and lore that are contained within the game. I haven't played any of the newer games, so I can't testify to those, but in the earlier games, the bits and pieces of lore scattered about through secrets and easily missed details really built an eerie and terrifying lore that became legendary within the community. I'm pretty sure this lore is where creators like game theorists became as big as they were. I mean, heck, MatPat even got a cameo within the movie. The impact Five Nights at Freddy's made on the internet and horror culture is undeniable, even if its rating has drawn in quite the family-friendly audience. On the scariness level, well, Five Nights at Freddy's is mainly jump scares, and though it does have some creepy character designs for the animatronics, I must say, I would give Five Nights at Freddy's about a 6 out of 10 on the spookiness scale. In Sound Mind. In Sound Mind is a psychological horror game that was released in 2021 and was developed by the indie studio We Create Stuff. It's rated T by the ESRB for violence and language. The story follows Desmond Wales, a psychiatrist who gets trapped in a nightmare-like world based on an apartment building. Desmond is kind of like a JRPG protagonist because he has a bad case of amnesia, meaning he doesn't remember much of how he got here at all. The game revolves around Desmond trying to solve a case where all of his patients were all victims of a seemingly connected chemical conspiracy. To do this, he is able to enter into their memories via the therapy sessions he had taped with them. This makes Desmond's office act as a hub world for the game, which is really underrated in my opinion, because not enough games do hub worlds like this anymore. Not only is it fun from a gameplay perspective, as it allows you to leave the office and explore the apartment building to unlock new secrets and collectibles as you progress through the game, but it also lets the player feel at ease when they've been on edge from being chased by shadow monsters and ghosts and such during the missions. Throughout the game, Desmond is not alone. He finds out that his pet cat that Tanya can now talk and acts as a guide character for him, which is charming in my opinion. He also finds out that he's being stalked by an ominous man in a trench coat who loves ARGs way too much, since he basically makes this whole game an ARG for Desmond. Seriously, this guy will give you phone calls, leave notes, and even stalk you to make sure that you're following his game plan. He seems to know way too much about Desmond and his patience, but he does have a really cool design, and the voice acting for him is top notch. Also, when I caught him a few times watching me or stalking me throughout the game, I genuinely felt uneasy. This character is a great antagonist in the game. I really appreciate the psychological horror factors that this game employs, much more than I enjoy some person getting ripped apart in a bloody mess in some other games. The story and puzzles in this game have a lot of effort and creativity put into them, which makes the game unique amongst other indie horror games, and it makes it fun to play. I won't lie though, most of the sections of this game did not seem very scary to me. The environments have a great atmosphere built into them, but the only one that I felt was genuinely scary was the supermarket with the ghost, and that mannequin section later on. Ugh, I will never not find mannequins creepy, even if it is an overdone trope. I would definitely recommend this game for its story, puzzles, and atmosphere, but it isn't too scary for me, so I would probably give it about a 5.5 out of 10 on the spooky scale. White Day, a labyrinth called school. Oh boy, where do I even begin with this game? White Day is a remake of a very old, now abandonware game on PC. It's a Korean indie horror game set in high school in the United States. Just kidding. In Korea, of course. The game is a first-person survival horror where the protagonist is trying to find his crush after school one day to give her a gift, as is customary on White Day in Korea, but they both end up being trapped inside the school, and it's very haunted. This game, for me, started off really strong. I was intrigued by the story, wanting to know why the school is haunted and what would happen to the main characters. I enjoyed the atmosphere. Being set in a dark and empty school gave this game a certain surreal atmosphere because of its liminality. Wandering around this dark and empty school also gave you this overwhelming sense of fear and loneliness. To progress in this game, you must solve a series of puzzles that continuously open up new areas of the school. It really becomes about exploration and puzzle solving more than combat per se. There's really no combat in this game. There are some spooky encounters with the paranormals scattered throughout, but the enemy you will encounter the most is the school janitor. Yep, you heard me. This janitor takes his job seriously. So seriously, in fact, that he will chase you and try to beat you to death with a baseball bat for being just at the school past hours. The first time he chases you, it's pretty scary, but this gets old real quick. Other horror games have enemies that stalk you, so this isn't a new concept per se. For example, the Resident Evil 2 remake has the Tyrant, or Mr. X, enter the police station at a certain point throughout the story, and from that point forward, he'll continuously stalk you and try to knock you out with his down smash. What makes the Tyrant so good, though, is that although he may be intimidating, he can be avoided with proper distancing and movement. He can also be temporarily evaded in the safe room. So, once you get used to his rhythm and how to avoid him, you can still get stuff done around the police station when he's around if you're quick and good enough. With the janitor in White Day, the second he spots you, it's over. You need to start running for your life. Somehow, this geriatric janitor can run just as fast as an absolutely shredded Korean high school student.
Dude, you're ripped!
I found that ultimately, one of the only ways to avoid him is by running into the bathroom and then locking yourself into a stall and then waiting until he leaves.
Why are you locked in the bathroom? You talking to me?
And he does not leave for a long time. Sometimes I waited like 10 minutes before this guy left. In the last section of the game, the janitor also constantly bugged out for me and got stuck in the middle of the room where he was always guaranteed to see me because I needed to cross that main area where he was stuck at. I know that some people who glaze this game will probably claim that that's a skill issue on my end, but I'm just gonna ask you, why do you hate yourself? Half the time, he's just busted. I could probably make a whole video on why this guy is so horrendous, but I'm getting a little carried away here. To come back to my main point, is White Day scary? Well, I won't deny that there are some scary moments in this game, but most of the scariness does boil down to jump scares, which do occasionally catch me off guard. Get away from me, bro. Yeah. Get to the bathroom, hide, blast it. Ah! Right! Gah! What was that? The bathroom ghost? What is this, Harry Potter? Moaning Myrtle chilling in the bathroom, just waiting for people to come by. I hate that. Never safe anywhere, man. Jump scares aside though, there is some genuinely great horror in this game within the atmosphere that it's created. The darkness, the isolation, the sound design as you're wandering through the school, the rain continuously pouring, and complete with random noises and thumps that constantly make you gaslight yourself into thinking someone or something could be around any corner. Also, the lore of the school, learned through scattered notes and memos found throughout your exploration, also adds to the eeriness of the overall atmosphere, although sometimes these can be hit or miss, since the English translation of these notes seems to be pretty rough, like it was just done on Google Translate or something and they called it a day. Overall, I'd give White Day a 5.8 out of 10 on the spooky scale. Crow Country. Last but not least, I'm going to talk about a game that you may not have heard of called Crow Country. Crow Country released in 2024 and was developed by SFB Games, which, fun fact, is a studio run by the guys who made the Decline of Video Gaming Flash animations, which you could find on sites like Newgrounds back in the day. Anyways, Crow Country is a survival horror game that is inspired by and is a homage to the early survival horror games of the PS1 era, like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. The game follows the protagonist, Mara Forrest, a special agent and firearms expert, to investigate an abandoned theme park called Crow Country. She's searching for a wanted man named Edward Crow, who, coincidentally enough, owns the theme park. During her search, however, she finds that the park is infested by monsters, and must solve a series of puzzles to progress through the park and find Mr. Crow. This game is rated teen for blood, violence, and language, but out of all the games on this list, I'd say this one pushes its rating the hardest. I mean, there's blood everywhere in the environment, the monsters bleed when you shoot them, you can even decapitate some enemies with well-placed shots. Not saying this game is super gory or anything like that, but the blood and violence does seem to be quite a bit heavier than anything else we've seen on this list so far. This game is also probably my favorite game on this list. It really does play like the older Resident Evil games, if you've ever played any of those, with the character being controlled from an isometric point of view. However, whereas the older Resident Evil games had fixed camera angles and tank controls, Crow Country features a modern control set and a free camera, but they do give you an option to play with tank controls if you're really into that. The atmosphere in this game is incredible. The developers did an excellent job of making the theme park feel desolate and creepy. The areas of this theme park did consistently make me feel anxious and on edge. Outside of the eeriness of the atmosphere, this game isn't too scary for me. Some of the monsters look creepy, but the style of everyone kind of looking like wood puppets makes it seem a bit less scary to me. Don't get me wrong, I actually like the art direction and the style that this game goes for a lot, but it definitely doesn't feel quite as scary as something like, say, the Resident Evil 1 remake. My wife also wondered about the art style of this game when she saw me playing it. She asked me, "What are you playing? This looks like Lego Resident Evil." I thought that was pretty funny, so now I usually refer to this game as Lego Resident Evil. And just like Resident Evil and horror games of that era, this game plays heavily on solving puzzles and resource management. Having limited resources always does make things feel a lot more stressful. You don't necessarily have the resources you need to take out every monster in the game, but I think that's what makes it more fun and more interesting. You have to learn how to avoid some of the monsters because you'll be continuously returning to areas to progress in certain puzzles. The puzzles overall are pretty good, but I would say they lean towards the easier side. There were only a few puzzles that I really got stuck on, and most of them I could pick up pretty quickly, but I still say overall they're well crafted. I don't want to go too in-depth about this game in this video because this video is meant to just be ranking these games based on how scary they are, but if you do want to see me make a full video about this game, I would be happy to do that. Overall, I would definitely recommend this game as well. Also, I don't want to give any spoilers just in case you're really interested in playing it, because it's definitely worth experiencing going in blind on this game, I would say. Overall, this game might not be too scary to me, but I would definitely recommend it. It is probably one of my favorite games I've played in a while. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10 on the spooky scale. It's still probably scarier than some of those other games on this list. So, are T-rated horror games scary? Well, to my surprise, some of them can be quite spooky. Overall, I don't think a game needs intense blood, gore, violence, language, or anything else not family friendly to be scary. It just needs to have a great atmosphere, art style, and sound design. In regards to storytelling, I find find that games that rely more on environmental and investigative storytelling tend to be scarier than the ones that just tell you a story by expositing it. This is because this type of storytelling makes the story more of a mystery that the players must uncover themselves as they play through it, which drastically increases the level of immersion into the game's world and environment. The level of care that's put into immersion, story, and atmosphere is why I and so many others love the horror genre of video games. But have you played any of these games? If so, what did you think of them? At the end of the day, being scared of certain media is pretty subjective. Some people are just harder to spook than others. But what other T-rated horror games are out there that you liked and didn't appear in this video? I'll probably make a part 2 of this video eventually, so if there's anything you wanted me to cover, make sure you leave it down in the comments below. Anyways, that's all I got, guys. Peace out.